The wheelchair felt like a throne he had never asked for. Muhammad Ali sat in the front row of the Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church in Philadelphia, his body still, his hands folded in his lap. It was November 2011, and outside, the autumn wind scattered leaves across the pavement like memories refusing to settle. Inside, 4,000 people had gathered to say goodbye to Joe Frazier, the man who had been Ali's greatest rival, his fiercest enemy, and perhaps, in ways neither of them fully understood, his truest mirror. The organ played softly, hymns drifting through the air like smoke from extinguished candles. The smell of flowers was everywhere, lilies and roses arranged in great white sprays around the closed casket. And Ali, who had once filled arenas with his voice, who had proclaimed himself the greatest with a confidence that shook the world, sat in absolute silence. He could not speak anymore. Parkinson's had taken that from him years ago. But his eyes, those eyes that had stared down every challenger, those eyes that had seen triumph and exile and comeback and decline, those eyes were speaking now, and what they said was something that words might never have been able to express. Imagine yourself in that church, the soft rustle of programs being opened and closed, the muffled sobs from somewhere in the back rows, the weight of history pressing down on every shoulder. Because this was not just a funeral. This was the final chapter of the greatest rivalry boxing had ever known. For decades, Ali and Frazier had been bound together by something stronger than friendship or hatred. They had fought 3 times, each bout a war that left both men permanently changed. The first fight, in 1971, had handed Ali his first professional defeat. The third, in Manila, had nearly killed them both. Between and after those fights, they had traded words sharper than any punch. And now, one of them was gone, and the other sat motionless in the front row, carrying the weight of everything that had been said and could never be unsaid. Close your eyes and feel the stillness of that moment. The air thick with grief and memory, the flickering candles casting shadows on the walls, the presence of something sacred, something that transcends the boundaries between enemies and friends. According to those who were close to both fighters, the relationship between Ali and Frazier was far more complicated than the public ever knew. In the beginning, before their first fight, Frazier had actually supported Ali during the exile years, when Ali was stripped of his title for refusing military service. When no state would grant him a license to fight, Frazier had spoken up for him. He had even lent him money. But then came the promotion for their first fight, and Ali, ever the showman, had turned Frazier into a villain. He called him ugly. He called him a gorilla. He called him an Uncle Tom, a tool of white America, a traitor to his race. The words were meant to sell tickets, but they cut deeper than any blade. Picture Joe Frazier in those days, a proud man who had grown up in poverty in South Carolina, who had worked in a slaughterhouse to support his family, who had won Olympic gold and world championships through nothing but will and heart. And here was Ali, calling him names that questioned his very identity as a black man. Frazier never forgave him, not fully. The bitterness lasted decades, surfacing in interviews and chance encounters, a wound that refused to heal. When Ali lit the Olympic torch in Atlanta in 1996, Frazier was watching from somewhere in the crowd, and later he would say, with a bitterness that still burned, that he would have liked to push Ali into the cauldron. But hatred and love are often closer than we admit. And as the years passed, as both men grew older and slower, and more aware of their own mortality, something began to shift. Let your breathing slow now, matching the gentle rhythm of the organ music. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Feel the weight of years settling, the sharp edges of old wounds slowly wearing smooth. They had met again, several times, in the years before Frazier's death. Not as enemies, not quite as friends, but as something in between. 2 warriors who had tested each other's limits and found respect buried beneath the rubble of their battles. Ali had sent Frazier a birthday card. Frazier had acknowledged, grudgingly, that Ali was indeed the greatest. And then, in November 2011, Frazier was diagnosed with liver cancer. He was gone within weeks. The man who had taken Ali's best punches and kept coming forward, who had fought with a heart that seemed too large for his chest, was finally stopped by an opponent no one can defeat. When Ali heard the news, according to those who were with him, he grew very still. His face, already frozen by Parkinson's, seemed to freeze even further, as if the disease was not just physical, but had now entered his soul. He did not speak, could not speak, but those who knew him understood. A part of Ali died that day too. Imagine the days leading up to the funeral. The phone calls from Ali's camp to Frazier's family, tentative and uncertain. The question that hung in the air, would Ali be welcome? Could his presence be seen as anything other than intrusion, the final insult from a man who had given so many? But Frazier's family said yes. They understood, perhaps better than anyone, that the story of Joe Frazier could not be told without Muhammad Ali. They were opposites who completed each other, enemies who defined each other, two halves of a whole that the world would never see again. And so, Ali came to Philadelphia, the city where Frazier had made his name, the city whose steps Rocky would later climb in tribute to fighters like Smokin' Joe. He came in a wheelchair, wearing a dark suit, his hands trembling slightly, his eyes alert and present. Close your eyes and enter that church with him. The wooden pews worn smooth by generations of worshippers, the stained glass windows filtering the gray November light into soft colors, the faces turning as Ali is wheeled down the aisle, some curious, some tearful, some still holding on to old angers that funerals cannot quite dissolve. He was placed in the front row, near the family. Frazier's children were there, his grandchildren, the extended clan that Smokin' Joe had built and loved and provided for through all those brutal rounds in all those distant rings. They looked at Ali, and he looked back. And in that exchange, something passed between them that only they could understand. The service was long, as funerals for great men often are. Speakers rose to share memories, songs were sung, prayers were offered. And through it all, Ali sat motionless, a monument to a rivalry that had shaped both their lives. But there was a moment, according to those who were watching closely, when something changed in Ali's face. It came during a tribute video, when footage from their fights flashed across the screens mounted on either side of the altar. There they were, young and strong and beautiful, throwing punches that could have killed lesser men. There was the thriller in Manila, both fighters exhausted beyond human endurance, Ali calling Frazier the toughest man in the world after it was over. And Ali's eyes grew wet. Feel that moisture now, not as sadness alone, but as release, as acknowledgement, as the final letting go of something that had been held too tightly for too long. He could not wipe his own tears anymore. The Parkinson's had taken that simple ability along with so much else. So they rolled down his cheeks freely, leaving tracks on a face that had once danced with expression and now wore stillness like a mask. What was he crying for? Perhaps for Frazier, the warrior who had pushed him to his absolute limits. Perhaps for himself, for the things he had said and could never take back. Perhaps for the youth they had shared and spent, for the glory and the pain that had bound them together more tightly than any friendship could have. Or perhaps he was crying for all of it, for the whole beautiful, terrible miracle of their intertwined lives, which had reached its end here in this Philadelphia church on a cold November day. Breathe deeply now and let your own grief surface, whatever grief you carry, the losses you have known, the words you wish you had said differently, the relationships that were complicated and precious and impossible to fully resolve. Let it rise like water from a deep well and let it flow. After the service, Ali was wheeled to the casket for a private moment. The church had mostly emptied, only family and close friends remaining. According to those who witnessed it, Ali's handlers positioned his wheelchair close to where Frazier lay, and for several minutes, Ali simply looked. What did he see? The face of his enemy, peaceful now in a way it had never been in life? The face of his mirror, the man who had shown him things about himself that no one else could? The face of mortality itself, the reminder that all fights eventually end. He reached out with a trembling hand. The movement was slow, uncertain, the Parkinson's making every inch a struggle. But he reached, and his fingers, those fingers that had formed fists to batter Frazier's body countless times, now brushed gently against the side of the casket. A touch, that was all. A single touch, lasting perhaps 5 seconds. But in that touch was everything that words had failed to say for 40 years. I'm sorry. I respected you. You made me who I am. I will see you again. Then the hand dropped, and Ali was wheeled away, out of the church, into the gray Philadelphia afternoon, away from the body of the man he had fought and mocked and needed more than he had ever admitted. Listen now to the silence after the service. The organ has stopped. The mourners have gone home. The flowers remain, their fragrance filling the empty church, like a prayer that lingers after the prayer has ended. And somewhere, in a dimension beyond this one, perhaps two fighters are finally at peace. The drive back to Ali's hotel was quiet. Lonnie, his wife, held his hand and did not try to fill the silence with words. Outside the windows, Philadelphia passed by, the city of brotherly love, the city where Frazier had built his legacy and trained his body and raised his family. That night, according to those who were with him, Ali did not sleep well. He stirred and turned, caught in dreams that no one could share. Perhaps he was fighting again, young and fast, dancing around a ring, while Frazier came forward with that relentless pressure. Perhaps he was apologizing, finally finding the words that had eluded him in waking life. Perhaps he was simply sitting with his old rival, two men at the end of their journeys, watching the sun set on everything they had built and destroyed together. Let yourself drift towards sleep now, as Ali eventually drifted. The funeral is over. The words have been spoken. The tears have been shed. What remains is something quieter, something that feels almost like peace. They will be remembered together, always. Ali and Frazier, Frazier and Ali. You cannot tell the story of one without telling the story of the other. They are woven into each other's legacies like threads in a tapestry, inseparable, even in death. And perhaps that is the truest form of immortality. Not monuments or records or championships, but being bound to another soul so completely that history cannot pull you apart. Sleep now. The church is empty. The candles have been extinguished. But somewhere, in the space between memory and dream, two fighters are still circling each other, not with fists raised, but with arms open, ready, at last, to embrace.